900 or mjmillerjewelers.com.
Ever since we lined up this interview, I've been excited about having a conversation about interviews. We've got Dan Gelfond and Ron Bliwas of Personal History Interviews on Get Down to Business. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Fantastic. So, Dan, tell us about the company.
Well, my partner and I are both former interviewers for Steven Spielberg's project, and we now have a company that specializes in videotaped interviews to preserve someone's personal history.
Fascinating. And that project with Steven Spielberg was absolutely incredible. So, Ron, tell us a little bit about what you do and some of those success stories, people that you've worked with that you'd like to promote here.
What people really love about what we do is that they know that they can pass along money. But the most important thing is to pass along your story. Who you were, how did you get there? Because that's what future generations want to know. And the money gets dissipated, but the story will never die if you put it on tape.
That's for sure. I know from many family conversations, a lot of those stories are slowly disappearing, and that's and I try to remember as much as I can. But you know, it's great when you're able to capture it, and it sounds like you've helped a lot of people and helped a lot of families, and potentially even stories, business stories. I just came from West Rogers Park and met somebody who's been in business for a long time, and they're trying to capture the information from their previous generations. So tell us about a family that you worked with. You don't need to use names, but tell us, the stories that you may have heard and how you go about the interview process.
Well, how we go about it is we go right back to the beginning. What were your parents like? Tell us about your grandparents. What was it like growing up? What were the major influences in your life? How did your parents impact you, your grandparents? Because for me, if I had this of my grandparents and my great-grandparents, it would be invaluable. So I keep that in the back of my mind, and Dan does too, when we interview. What would somebody want to know generations from now about this person?
How long is the typical finished product?
It's usually 2 hours.
2 hours. So are you doing a lot of editing? No. So you're taking the answers unfiltered. Unfiltered. Absolutely fascinating. So, and typically, are you interviewing just the subject?
Yes.
Or are you also interviewing family?
No. We can interview, and we've done some families, but it's primarily the subject. If they want to bring their family in afterwards, they can do that. But we're primarily focused on the subject.
How easy is it to tell a story?
It's once they start talking, everything comes back. Their mothers, they could smell their mother's food, and and they could feel their grandmother with their arms around them. It's so easy to take them back.
So, speaking of stories, tell us your story. Tell us how you got to this point and how you decided to both you and Dan spend time on capturing those stories for other families.
Well, when we did the Shoah Foundation and interviewed Holocaust survivors, I offered this service to a few of my friends to do their parents, and I loved it. And I'm cutting back on my advertising career, and I wanted something going forward. And it's a passion. It's an absolute passion to put people's lives on tape. And so it was when we found each other, it was like a miracle because Dan had done this, and we both have that passion to put people's lives on tape and to preserve those memories for future generations. And if people don't do it, they're lost forever.
Is it ever too early or too soon to capture those stories?
Well, I wouldn't do it in my 40s or 50s, okay? But I think by the time you get to be 60 and a little later, for those people listening, to put your parents on tape or your grandparents, you have to do it before it's too late, because if you procrastinate, it never gets done.
So we're talking with Ron Bliwas and Dan Gelfond, who are talking to us about capturing stories of parents, grandparents. But Ron, who's typically your client? Is it typically has it ever happened that somebody actually decides for themselves that they want to capture that story?
Absolutely.
Is that the usual circumstance?
It's a combination.
Okay.
Those people that are listening, and if they say to themselves, certainly I'm going to leave them money, but I want to leave who I was, my personality, what made me tick, because that's what they'll want to know generations from now.
So, Ron, what advice do you have? What advice do you have for our listeners that are that are contemplating this, that might think this might be a good fit, but they're just not sure?
They should talk to us.
That's an easy one.
That's an easy one. Go on our website or call us, and we'll be more than happy to talk to you about it.
So, Dan, how can people get a hold of both you and Ron to talk about this?
They can go to our website, which is www.personalhistoryinterviews.com, personalhistoryinterviews.com, or call us at 847-940-9999.
It looks like you have fun doing these interviews.
They're great. I mean, you hear unbelievable stories from people, and we get thanked profusely afterwards, especially when someone's gone.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And the final product, how is it delivered?
It's on a DVD, and we can give them as many copies as they need so they can share it with all their family. If they need it digitally, we can do that too.
That's amazing. Absolutely fantastic. So once again, that phone number one more time.
847-940-9999.
I really, really encourage our listeners, reach out to Ron and to Dan, have that conversation about capturing stories of parents, grandparents, or even if you have a story, contact them about recording that story so you can pass it along to future generations. This show is all about profiling stories of entrepreneurs, and you guys are entrepreneurs. You guys are starting a fantastic, fantastic business. But it's about hearing those stories, and every business has a story behind it. So capture that story, talk to Dan and to Ron. After the break, as promised, I'm going to be sharing some tips, advice, and information for you about employment. It's a touchy subject, but a subject that you need to think about. That's right, you're listening to Get Down to Business. I'm your host, Shalom Klein. Don't touch that dial.